Welcome, segment one, or excuse me, this is a public webinar, Saturn and Aquarius, Archetypes and Cycles. This is Media Monk, and I have Kim Marie on the line. I'm just going to kind of pay attention to our attendees as we get 1 or 2 minutes away from go time here. So we'll give a little bit of a moment or two after that 6 o'clock starting hour to allow people to get on here. So welcome to Saturn and Aquarius. I was going to call it a sigh of relief, but we'll see.
I'm going to speak about that subject called contagion.
Yeah, contagion.
It's an Aquarius word. So
Six.
hello, everyone who's coming on. We'll get
Hair.
started in just a little bit. Always know you can ask questions on the Q&A panel. Is that what it's called, leRoy?
Yeah, just go ahead and click on that orange arrow you see on your screen once you're entering the webinar, and that will expand to show you a control panel that should have a question and answer board, a chat board. Oh, I suppose some other functionality there. I guess a lot of what I see is not available on the public side, so yeah, Q&A. That's if you have a question, go ahead and shoot that to me in that Q&A panel, and I'll try to answer it. If not, I'll throw it to Kim based upon the relevancy and where she's at in the flow of the webinar.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just let me know if when you're ready to go, Kim. I guess we can start anytime.
Well, let's give them another minute. My side says that I'm already recording, okay? My computer shows that it starts recording as soon as you open things up. Okay.
Yeah, you got that. I got that auto set for you, and I don't like to do that because I don't want to have to worry about editing, but I wonder if I'm going to get the recording on my side, because I don't see. I'm showing that the session's being recorded too, Kim, so we're fine.
Okay.
I guess it's time to rock and roll.
All right. So welcome, everyone. Yahoo! Saturn's going to go into Aquarius. How many of us want to do a dance? We've been waiting to get a little relief from Capricorn energy. Huh? So what we're going to look at tonight is Saturn in Aquarius through its archetypes, and then a little bit on the cycles, mainly the retrograde cycles. And then on Wednesday, we'll look at Saturn in Aquarius through each of the 12 houses. Before we get started, though, hold on. I got to click and get my PowerPoint slide going. First of all, our housekeeping slide here at EAN, you have 4 different ways to study astrology with us. We have our free new and full moon podcasts. We have our Astro Library that you can go look at. Of course, our Evolutionary Astrology course. And I've been doing astrology consultations for 30-some years. And so those are live links when you get the PDF that you can click on those from your computer and go to any one of those pages. And so here are the dates that Saturn is going to go into Aquarius before it turns retrograde and dips back into Capricorn for a few more months, the second half of 2020 actually, and then it'll go into Aquarius again and be there all of 21 and 22. So Saturn has about a 28-29 year cycle around the sun. which means that it spends approximately 2.5 years in every sign. Now that can vary by months, but I always go from the very first moment it dips into the sign and the very last day it leaves and goes out. So over the last few Saturn signs, I've been saying, while it goes back and forth, it's still in a sign for about 3 years. And one of the themes that we're going to look at with Saturn in Aquarius is the interface between the past and the future. Here's the Saturn astronomy. I always leave that in there. You can look at this in more detail later on if you want. The main thing I'll point out, in addition to its revolution around the sun, is that it has one retrograde cycle per year. It's retrograde for about 4.5 months. And when it stands still to go retrograde and direct, we call that the stationary period. It appears to stand still for 5 days when it changes directions. There's a little more Saturn astronomy, second largest planet in the solar system. It is also the least dense planet because it's made of mostly hydrogen and helium. Its rings are only 1/2 mile thick, and it has 53 officially titled moons, 29 untitled. It has the second largest moon in the solar system after the Earth's moon. This second largest one's called Titan. So here's a picture of Saturn, and I think this is one of the most beautiful pictures there is of this planet, showing you all of its many rings that are out there. One page on Saturn mythology that I've had in here for a while. I'm not an astrologer who works a lot with mythology, so all you're going to get is this right here. It's just, we kind of all have our areas that attract us and we like to learn more of. Mythology just wasn't one of mine. So you can read this one for yourself as well. But the only thing I will say is many of us know Saturn as Father Time or the Lord of Time, Space, Time, Mortality. The Saturn archetype is passive polarity, energy moving back to center, cardinal modality, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and the earth element, which is the physical. One of the biggest archetypes about Saturn from the perspective of evolutionary astrology is that it is known as the structure of the individuated consciousness. It's the boundaries of what we know on a conscious level or what's very easy for us to access. So if we go in from Saturn to Jupiter, Mars, Venus, up to the sun, those are all conscious planets. If we look at Chiron, it's sometimes called the Rainbow Bridge. It's a dwarf planet these days, so I include it in the solar system just like I still do Pluto. They call Chiron that Rainbow Bridge because it bridges between Saturn, the individuated consciousness, and Uranus, the individuated unconsciousness. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto are the 3 unconscious planets. If you are someone who was born with Saturn retrograde natally, then for you, you have the door to the unconsciousness thrown wide open. People who have natal Saturn retrograde can dip into the unconsciousness easier than those who were born with Saturn direct. And if you have Saturn retrograde natally, you're also the natural rebel, rebelling against all authorities, including the first authority, your parents. leRoy and I have raised a young male who has natal Saturn retrograde, and so we learned this one firsthand, and we just had to set him free and let him be his own authority, and the relationship calmed down, and we're all doing just great now. Saturn can also turn retrograde or direct by progression, not solar arcs. Solar arcs only move forward, but you can have Saturn direct and it will go retrograde in your lifetime, possibly, not always, and vice versa. You can have natal retrograde Saturn turn direct by progression. Now, all the other planetary archetypes from Sun through Jupiter and Chiron through Pluto, they are all filtered, defined, integrated by Saturn and that individuated consciousness. However, Saturn also wants to try and suppress in charge and control. It really doesn't always want to look what's below the surface. Look at what's underneath the surface. And that's where the unconscious planets come in and throw things up there, especially Uranus, as we start interfacing these two archetypes in a few slides. If you are new to evolutionary astrology, here's how you would look for the structure of the individuated consciousness in any chart. You look to see where natal Saturn is by its sign, house, and the aspects it makes. You look to the rulers of the sign house with their own sign house aspects. What's the sign on the 10th house cusp? What's its planetary ruler and where is it by sign house aspects? Are there any planets in the 10th house cusp or in the 10th house, excuse me? And then where is Capricorn in the chart? What house cusp does it rule? Are there planets in Capricorn? What houses are they in and what aspects do they make? I'm going to show you a very brief example that I used through Saturn in Capricorn, and this is Donald Trump's chart, and the same principles. First of all, we look to see where natal Saturn is by sign house aspects. Natal Saturn is up here, 23, 24 degrees Cancer in the 11th house. The ruler of Cancer is the moon, blue arrow. The ruler of the 11th house is Uranus, another blue arrow. They happen to be opposite to each other. And so these two rulers are part of this opposition with the nodal axis. Donald Trump was born on a lunar eclipse. And so that whole Gemini Sag polarity gets pulled into his structure of consciousness. The sign on the 10th house cusp is Taurus. Its ruler, Venus, is also right here at about 26 Cancer in a new phase conjunction to Saturn. We also have the ruler in the 10th house. We have the North Node and another planet in the 10th house. If we go over here and look at Capricorn, we have 28 degrees of Capricorn ruling that 5th house. There are no planets in Capricorn, so this one's not active. And so we have someone whose structure of consciousness can be quite emotional, Cancer. 11th house, there could be a variety of perspectives in how it could come through, and you're going to learn those three major ones with Aquarius 11th house in a few more slides here. But you know, here's someone who demands loyalty. You know, the family, his 5 children, you know, they probably learned early on, you know, dad's boss, and you stick by with whatever dad says, or you will be thrown out of the group. 11th house. He also has a very strong verbosity language in his own structure of consciousness with those rulers in Gemini Sag and part of that whole polarity there. He also has a planet square Saturn. I'm not going to go into depth here. I'm just trying to show you a couple of tidbits. He has Jupiter moving towards a first quarter square to Saturn. It's the crescent phase side of the square. And so in the second house, there's a certain element of stubbornness that comes in to this structure of consciousness with Taurus on the 10th house, Venus conjunct Saturn, and then the second house planets, including that Jupiter there. You're either with them or you're not. That's where that Libra draws a line in the sand. And again, you're with them or you're not. We could go into a lot more detail, but I think you get the point of how you will look at this in your own chart. So if we start looking at Saturn then transiting through Aquarius, it's going to be the interface between the individuated consciousness, boundaries of consciousness, and the individuated unconsciousness. That is one of the main archetypes of Aquarius, 11th house, and Uranus. If you're new to EA, we look at the planet, the sign, and the house as an interchangeable archetype. And so Uranus, Aquarius, is that individuated unconsciousness or unconscious mind. Sometimes we will call it far memory. It contains three types of information. It contains the past in all its detail, the past of this life so far, and every past life we've ever lived. And we access that through spontaneous memories that surface into consciousness all on their own, through repeating prior events, through past life regression, hypnotherapy, breath work, Akashic records. We will all have Uranus 11th house and Aquarius in our charts. And so we will all have those periodic time periods when something from the past just pops up into consciousness. Oh, what's that mean? What do I need to do about it? How do I address it? It also represents the present that we suppress via Saturn. Saturn, remember, boundaries of consciousness, tries to push and things below the surface that it wants to avoid or not make any effort or deal with. Uranus, the individuated unconsciousness, pushes it up. So when Saturn transits through Aquarius, we're going to have details from the past popping up into consciousness all on their own. Anything we don't want to work through that we just want to suppress in the present, popping up through Saturn and Aquarius. The third thing about this Aquarius archetype is that it also contains the blueprints of the future, that lightning bolt that traditional astrology talks about. And we will look at that through the repetitious future-orientated messaging. And I will give you more on that in another slide or two. The point that I want you to see here is as Saturn transit through Aquarius, that boundary it holds on what it wants to have control over gets blown to smithereens in Aquarius. And these details about the past or suppressed present or messages about the future, they don't come up in a real easy storybook fashion. They come up bits and pieces all over the place, and we kind of have to use a little bit of logic to go, well, is this the past that's getting in my face right now? In other words, they'll come up all over the place, and we kind of got to put it together ourselves in consciousness. Now, Saturn in Aquarius is going to be about breaking free from any and all consensus conditionings. Saturn, Capricorn, 10th house, in general, rule the consensus. Approximately 7 out of 10 souls on planet Earth, any race, any continent, that conform to consensus society. They can't step outside the space and times they live in. Now, when Saturn goes through Aquarius, even the consensus gets shook up out of their comfort zones. And it can make them quite resistant and protective. Aquarius is all about being able to liberate and become a group of one, to be who we uniquely are on an individual basis. That's not always something that's easy to do. And then we also do it collectively. And so as Saturn moves through Aquarius, we're not guaranteed that we're all going to be breaking free and progressing forward. It's just going to depend upon your own personal factors in your life, the state of consciousness within your soul. You'll be breaking free and liberating if you're more in the individuated and spirituated states of consciousness, as we call it in EA. Individuating about 2 out of 10 souls. I'm going to think for myself, thank you. And spirituating about 1 out of 10 souls on planet Earth who understand universal timeless concepts and natural laws. The more we're in that consensus mode, we want to cling to what makes us secure. We don't want to break free. And so sometimes that draws in cataclysms in our life that can be very traumatic. So if we're very resisting of change through Saturn in Aquarius, we may increase our experiences of trauma, whether we repeat a pattern from the past or we have a new trauma. Now, the broadest intent here when Saturn moves through Aquarius is for these traumas of the past to resurface into consciousness. We want to become aware of these old wounds and traumas and patterns. If we're conscious of them, that helps us or gives us the potential to heal. And of course, as you see on your screen, sometimes traumas will just be remembered. You have a spontaneous flash from the past just come up out of the blue. Remember taking a shower once years ago, and I had a spontaneous flashback of a past life, and it wasn't it was just a flash of something traumatic, and there I was in the shower bawling my eyes out. But I have remembered that from that moment onward, and I've worked to process with that a lot in the last 20 some years since I remembered it. Sometimes we will literally re-experience a trauma, and sometimes we'll have new traumas that will happen for the first time in this life. More on this whole archetype of trauma, whether it's something that comes in the present life or it's memories from past lives. EA defines it as an intense disturbance caused by a shocking event or stress that has a lasting effect. And this shocking event or intense disturbance, it can be spiritual, it can be mental, it can be emotional, and it can be physical. It can happen on any one of the 4 levels, and it can be any combination of them. And sometimes the trauma can be all of them. I have a girlfriend who had her house burned down. It's been a while, and they were on vacation. So the only thing they had was the suitcases of clothes that they traveled with. They lost everything. She lost all of her mother's antique furniture. I would say that she experienced a traumatic event on all 4 levels. What happens when we do not process through or deal with the trauma? If we suppress it, it starts to dictate our behaviors on subconscious levels. It causes us, some of you may know from EA that, Uranus, Aquarius in the 11th house, again, it's the air modality, air element, it's fixed air. And so we freeze, we will mentally freeze up, or we'll have that same overreaction to a simple little situation. We overreact compared to what the situation necessitated. That's how you know you have some unconscious trauma that you're still working to deal with. Now, from the perspective of EA, we feel that 85 to 90% of souls are born with past life trauma. And now we have a phrase for it, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. If you need any proof of reincarnation, just think about your own PTSD that you run around with. Because Aquarius is the element of air, it specifically rules mental trauma, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I probably don't have that written right, but people who have to compulsively wash their hands, or everything has to be perfectly in order before they can walk out the door. Sociopathic behaviors, multiple personality disorder, any neuroses or psychoses. It can even be just, again, that simple inability to make changes in your life when they're called for. So what all this brings into the picture then is we have to make a persistent effort to change the effects of trauma that we are all born with, that we all experience. And we can do this through alternative therapies, say the past life regression work or the breath work. We can do it through traditional therapies, the talk therapies, or sometimes people taking, bipolar drugs. That bipolar should have been in the mental trauma thing too. And so there's all kinds of ways, but the biggest thing to really remember and recognize is the effort. And that's where Saturn in Aquarius can be quite helpful for us, because Saturn is that cardinal modality of trying to go forward, trying to achieve things in our physical world. And so Saturn in Aquarius is basically going to be an opportunity for any of us and all of us to heal trauma. Now, Saturn, remember, goes into Aquarius March 21st. And what is today? March 9th? Well, let's look at this word contagion. It is an Aquarius word. The psychological definition of contagion is the spread of a behavior pattern, an attitude, or emotion from person to person or group to group through suggestion, propaganda, rumor, imitation. You can just think of people on the progressive side will look at Donald Trump and have the contagion of, he's ridiculous, he is selfish, he's a narcissist. People who are conservative and really like Donald Trump will have the contagion of thinking he's the chosen one. He can't do anything wrong. They love him no matter how much he lies. Just example. But we also have contagions that are in the physical world, which we will know as disease. And then this becomes the communication of a disease from one person to another by close contact. Who is aware of coronaviruses right now on planet Earth? Who's not aware? Coronavirus is a contagion. Now, coronaviruses are a very common type of viruses, and all viruses mutate, whether they're coronaviruses or just common flu viruses. The coronavirus that is coming out right now that has been mutating from animal to human, starting in China for I don't know exactly how long, the last 4 or 5 months or so, It has a tendency to really affect the respiratory areas. It is spread by contact, physical contact with another person. It is also spread by close proximity, and someone sneezes, and the virus is in the vapors of the sneeze. So here is your introduction to Saturn in Aquarius right now. And you can just look how it goes from, you know, one person just being absolutely paranoid and afraid to go out of their house to another person saying, oh, I'm just going to ignore it. I don't have to pay any attention to it, and everything in between. There is no vaccine available yet for COVID-19, which stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. It takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months at minimum to come up with vaccines for the mutations of viruses. So I feel that it's necessary for me to share with you my other work. I don't talk about it a lot in the astrology world. I don't ignore it. But the last Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the end of May 2000, that conjunction was one time at 22 degrees Taurus. It was exactly opposite my moon at 23 degrees Scorpio in the 10th house. And that's when I started becoming a facilitator for a church called EMC Squared. So March 27th will actually be my 20th anniversary of being on the AIM program of energetic balancing. Radionics is the general field. Vibrational medicine by Richard Gerber, if you want background on this. But we have been creating energy machines since the 1930s. They were fine-tuned in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and have been going ever since then. Basically, a photograph of you is not just a physical photograph. We have computers that can measure frequencies within your soul via your photograph. We call them imbalances. And before you can manifest the flu, you have to have the frequency of the flu within you. We can generate balancing frequencies to the flu imbalance. And you pick up and balance that frequency, that imbalance, you balance it energetically. Nothing supports it physically, and it moves up and out. We add anywhere from 5 to 10 new frequencies a week to this program in the 20 years I've been working with it. I don't live in fear of the flu. I don't live in fear of coronavirus. We've added 16 flu frequencies so far the winter of 2019-2020. I will say this verbally. It's not on the slide, your PowerPoint slide. So far, we found 6 coronavirus frequencies in the last couple of months. So we are continually watching for it to mutate and putting the balancing frequency on. If you are interested, you can go to our facilitator website, aimenergeticbalancing.com. It's available for humans and animals. I've been on it for 20 years. leRoy's been on it for 18. We have had family members on pretty much as long as we have been on. It's amazing. And I'm sitting here watching what's happening in the news and, you know, Aquarius, quantum physics. I'm going, when will consensus society catch up and recognize that there's faster, more efficient ways of healing ourselves? So contact me if you're interested in more information. Let's look a little bit more detail at Saturn in Aquarius and from the perspective of the past, suppressed present, and future. When we say the past in all its details, one more time, it includes current life and past lives. This can continue to have an effect upon us in the present and how we make choices into our future. And so the purpose again, Saturn in Aquarius, can we address the effects of our individual soul paths to evolve and break free? But we also have collective trauma as groups of people. Examples, Nazi extermination of Jews, today Syrian refugees in the United States, public mass shootings. What can happen with those consensus members of society is they may or may not understand the broader implication of what's going on in society. They may not understand that coronavirus in some ways is teaching us that borders of countries do not matter. They might be nice ways to try and live as groups of people, but to think that we can shut ourselves off from another country, it's ridiculous. It's it just doesn't, it's not real. And so there can be these cataclysmic events, and they can build up on collective levels as collective traumas. And what can happen here then is groups of people won't understand the larger implications, and they'll repeat the patterns. Look at how we have watched Pluto in Capricorn, and then the last 2-3 years of Saturn in Capricorn, and the rebirthing of the whole idea that the German Holocaust is a hoax. So we can be stuck in those traumas individually and collectively. Behooves each of us to do our best on an individual level to heal our past. We also, though, will do it collectively. Groups of people can reincarnate on a collective level to help heal mass traumas or contagions. There is the theory that many souls chose to come in and be German Jews in the 1930s and experience what happened because they thought it'd be horrific enough that we would say never again. Time will tell. Just one example. There can be those of us who are incarnating here at the ending of the Piscean age, moving into the Aquarian age, because we want to be those Aquarian rebels, and we want to see a return to more natural laws and principles of giving, sharing, and including. Here's going to be your time period to be active on it. However, one of the things that can be distorted with the Leo Aquarius polarity is social inequality, the whole concept of elitism, social classes of haves and have-nots. We've all become familiar with this through Pluto in Capricorn and the 1% having all of the income gains over the last 40 years versus the rest of us, and how it's become even more extreme over the last decade or so. Will that be broken up? Saturn and then Jupiter and then Pluto go into Aquarius. Time will tell. But you will see that there will be elites throughout Saturn in Aquarius that will hoard, that will go to the extremes with their wealth, that will not want to help out, that will not want to share, that will go into the better than, less than, and try to carry forth these extremes of haves and have-nots. There can be massive uprisings then to redistribute resources and change governmental institutions, however necessary. You cannot gut all of the public health institutions in a country and then expect to have the ability to deal on a real instant fast basis when a crisis like coronavirus comes up. And so the degree of the rebellions can relate to the degree that Saturn in Capricorn authority figures have done their power grabs. And of course, we will add on Jupiter in Capricorn in 2020 and Pluto in Capricorn over the last dozen years. Remember, though, the whole intent of the Aquarius archetype is to create social equality and unity in diversity. So we'll also have Saturn in Aquarius, as we said before, try to suppress anything we don't want to deal with. And we all go through this, even in individuated and spirituated states of consciousness. It represents the desire for the soul and its ego to be secure. I've created this structure in my life. I have this relationship, this job, this house, this car, this situation. And I don't know if I want to make changes that are presented to me. So we'll just ignore, we'll avoid it, we'll suppress it. Here again, we can have shock and awe, shock and trauma come up as well if it is something we need to address. So with this knowledge, you can be aware of these subtle ways over the next few years in which you avoid making the changes you need to make or addressing something you need to address with someone else in relationships. You have that leading edge here with Aquarius to make the changes. Make the effort. So we can also have collective groups rejecting change and suppressing everything and not wanting to take a look at it, not wanting to take a look at the immigrants that are, in extreme situations and looking for better life. In the US, those who have some type of health care, not even paying attention to those that do not have health care, or rejecting change to Medicare for all or a single payer system because we make so much profit from our sick people in this country. Those that have no insurance, those that are underinsured, and even all of you that have insurance. So one more time, the Aquarius archetype is going to push whatever is suppressed back up into consciousness until it's addressed. And if we can work with that Saturn inner reflection, that passive polarity to the Saturn archetype, and look inward, we can recognize what it is about our present day life that we need to shift and change. If you couldn't look at it from the example of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's campaigns, they both have been big promoters of Medicare for all or a single payer system. And it used to get no attention in the press. And look at how far that has come forward over the last 4 years. As we have Jupiter follow Saturn into Aquarius, it's not going to go away. And it will be there to address when Pluto goes into Aquarius as well. You can resist evolution, but you cannot prevent it. More on how Aquarius deals with this in just a minute. But I also want to look a little bit more into the blueprint of the future, which is part of this Aquarius archetype. It is recognized by the element of spontaneous, repetitious foresight coming into consciousness. The three major ways is clairvoyant, we see the future. Clairaudient, we hear inwardly, outwardly. Clairsentient, it comes through via our senses. It can come one specific way, it can come a combination. What we say in evolutionary astrology is if the future-orientated message comes once or twice, it's either fantasy, wishful thinking, or it's further down the road into the future, like 10, 15 years. But if that repetitious message about the future comes again, 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 it's our own individuated unconsciousness within our soul, bringing it to the surface to show us how we are meant to move forward in the near future, meaning now, the next 1 to 2 years. And if we will start to follow through on those repeating future messages, we can minimize potentially traumatic events happening. However, it's easier said than done. It is hard to do when that change threatens our current security. The most common example would be for a male or female, married, kids, mortgage, and they keep getting the message that they need to be free. Divorce. How many times will someone like that just ignore it because they're too settled in? Doesn't always have to be a big major change. It can be, a simple change of improving your diet or exercising more. It can, be little to small, all over the place. How are you just going to act as you become aware of where you are supposed to be moving into the future? So liberation on an egoic basis requires the courage to be a group of one, to individualize and change as evolution presents itself. So what will also happen with the Aquarius archetype and what will happen specifically as Uranus transits through Aquarius, both individuals and groups will fall into three categories in regards to evolution or change. There will be those who will go for it. They charge forward, the avant-garde, the rebels, the progressives, the visionaries. They take the Uranian action and say, let's change. There will be those that defend the past. This will be people who are more security conscious, or they can be in that consensus state of consciousness on a soul level. It's never as good as it was yesterday. They have the Saturnian reaction of defending the past. And then there are those in the middle who go back and forth. They change in some ways, they refuse to change in other ways. They follow the crowd, or they can be undecided, they can be uninformed, they can just be not paying attention. And so if the group says we've got to vote for Biden in the Democratic primaries because the, middle ground thinks this is the best way to defeat Trump. Spur of the moment, they cast their vote for Biden. And so we always have a continual interface of how we make these changes into the future. And we can apply these three choices of movement to everything we suppress in the present and to everything that keeps popping up from the past. One more time. The past, the suppressed present, and the future are all going to be coming up through Saturn and Aquarius. How do you want to move forward? A couple of comments here on Aquarius, and this is true of 11th house ruler Uranus. In general, Aquarius rules the brain. It's those dendrites of how we learn new information, and then literally dendrites in the brain learn how to hold that new knowledge and make it into a memory that we can access easier and easier. It then includes those synapses, those electrical sparks that fire in between neurons. And it's that phrase, what fires together wires together. So if you're someone who has to have reading material in front of you when you're eating, you can't eat till you find the newspaper or your iPhone and you can read. It can be anything. It's, again, what becomes patterns in the brain? How do we change those patterns? This is where Saturn, one more time, is going to be quite helpful because it can give us that willpower and courage to change crystallized thought patterns that then can help us shed old reality structures, create new ones as we want to see them come along for ourselves individually, for collective groups, however we are partaking. Saturn in, the Aquarius archetype rules the lining of the lungs. And so it has an effect with any and all respiratory issues that come through, be they from virus, bacteria, or fungi. And those three are always mutating. And I've just learned over the last 20 years of my energetic balancing that viruses, bacteria, and fungi are always trying to mutate in order to survive. They have their level of consciousness. And so we are always needing to be on top of that with the energetic balancing and frequencies. But all three of those can then get in and have an effect on the lungs. It's not just viruses. So this is where that archetype of contagion comes in through Uranus. It has rulership of the central nervous system, how everything talks to everything else in our body. And it has co-rulership of the nervous system in general with Mercury. Also, Aquarian rebellions have a tendency to follow Capricorn crystallizations. There are probably many of us in the astrological world, in the progressive world, that have just been waiting for these planets to get out of Capricorn and go into Aquarius, and how much can we be a part of the rebellions to come? Stay tuned. I say more on this a little bit later about the back and forth energy in 2020. But I also want to just say that Aquarius in general also rules electricity It rules technology and inventions. It, of course, rules like-minded groups, or what we will call friends. And it has general rulership of astrology, in case you didn't know that. Saturn in Aquarius. I wonder if astrology might become just a little bit more respected. Will we see an expansion of interest in astrology when Jupiter goes there in 21? Stay tuned. We'll see. However, under this subject, I want to just speak to this again. This is a slide that I spoke back with Uranus and Neptune. We are making a shift in human technology from conventional to quantum computing. And so conventional computing is like your calculator. It's binary. It stores and computes the number 1 or the number 0. And we have learned how to make these circuits that will do all this computing for us smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Just look at what your smartphone can do today compared to the very first phone you ever got. For many of us, our smartphone has literally replaced that big PC computer. Well, now it is going so small that it's going into what we call quantum computing. And this is where we're working with it via atoms and subatomic particles, smaller, smaller, smaller. And in quantum computing, we can store multiple values at the same time. The number 1, the number 0, both of them, anything in between. And the other thing that quantum mechanics are starting to allow us to do is computers can work parallel instead of serial. And the example here is if you've put any effort into studying quantum physics, you understand that light can be the particle and the wave. It can be static and moving at the same time. This type of computing is what is allowing us to move into what we call this artificial intelligence. It's already happening. It's already coming along. It's already here. It's going to start leaping forward through Saturn in Aquarius and make even more leaps as Jupiter and Pluto follow. And so quantum physics is an Aquarius archetype. And what we're really talking here is people ask, well, how can, with my world of energetic balancing, people say, well, how can you measure the frequency of a virus or the frequency of a cancer or a disease? It's because we have computers that now go finer and faster along the scale of physics. Think of it as AM and FM radio. AM radio waves are longer and slower than FM radio waves. We go further and further along that scale with energetic balancing. And so there are many technologies that are going into this whole quantum physics. I'll give you a couple examples here down the road. So get ready for some leaps. And I've used this slide before too. And so for those of you who followed Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code and a couple other books, and who's the actor that starred in his movies? Tom Hanks. The book Origin, it's a good book to read, and it's written from a fictional viewpoint, but he goes in and he explores this whole thing of artificial intelligence intelligence computers and how they can be programmed to simulate human thinking. And so he kind of lays out science has already disproved the 7-day creation myth of science. We haven't been here for 4,000 years. We've been here hundreds of thousands of years. And the big question that is still unanswered is, can science prove or disprove divine intelligence? It's a good book to read, and if you haven't, I'd recommend it as Saturn goes into Aquarius. Basically, it's bringing up this whole science versus morality debate. And what happens here is, religion tends to be Saturn consensus, and it wants to, bring us back to the past or stay with all of these old traditions. No disrespect to anybody who wants to go to church. Have you ever turned on the TV on Sunday mornings and watched the local church service for a few minutes? Have you watched all the ritual that they go through with clothing and etc.? Sometimes it's just like, it boggles my mind. And I have family members who still go to church. And so spirituality has basically got to adapt to evolving science, which is Uranus. And as we have Uranus move through Aquarius, followed by Jupiter and Pluto, we're really going to have to see spiritual leaps of growth. That's where Neptune and Pisces comes in to help, because you adapt or you go the way of the dinosaur. And that is also true with religion. We know that the Aquarian age is coming. We don't know an exact time. Astrologers go all over the place. We've already entered it. It's 50 years away. It's 100 years away. Who knows? But we do know that the Aquarian age will bring that interface between humans and computers. Just think about this little statistic at the bottom of your slide. 2165 is going to be the next Uranus-Neptune conjunction, and it will come at 6.5 degrees Aquarius, which, by the way, is the south node of the U.S. Natal chart. Wonder if our country will still be around. So Saturn in Aquarius is basically deconditioning from any and all conditioning factors in our life. And so this, of course, is going to include the Saturn archetypes of gender, parental, religious, societal, career, and economic. All of those factors can be very conditioning upon us all. And one more time, most of us, even individuating and spirituating, have a fear of changing directions and moving forward. And so we're going to have a big interface between being secure versus insecure. And it takes a lot of courage to liberate and be uniquely who we are versus being conditioned by all of those groups you see up here on this slide. I'm going to move into Saturn retrograde and take a big drink. As we said earlier, Saturn goes retrograde once a year for about 4.5 months. And whenever it turns retrograde by transit, that retrograde cycle is always related back to natal Saturn, wherever it is, natally in your chart by sign, house, and aspect. And you can replace the word Saturn here with any other planet. The retrograde planet is always excuse me, related back to the natal planetary archetype. Specific to Saturn, one more time, when it goes retrograde in the sky by transit, all of us, individually and collectively, have a chance to throw off old conditioning patterns, as well as opening the door to the unconsciousness and looking deep. Now, when Saturn goes retrograde, it brings about that principles of involution, compression, turning inward, depression, this passive polarity, energy returning back to the center. And that just naturally happens when Saturn goes retrograde, no matter what sign it is in. It has us look at our outer world and go, what's not working? What do I need to change? When we go inward, we reflect, we become aware of what motivates us to behave or act and speak in certain ways. And that involution can be figurative, with the outer world breaking down in some way. We lose the job, partner leaves us. It can be literal, death of the body and return of soul to spirit. When Saturn is retrograde, its intent is to inwardly accept ourselves regardless of the outer world, regardless of our role in the outer world, regardless of our circumstances in the outer world. It turns us inward, reaching for inner security. Moon, Cancer, 4th house opposite Saturn, Capricorn, 10th. So we review and reestablish inner security that then allows us to go back out there and recreate our world when Saturn turns direct again. So if you think about this, here are the 3 retrograde cycles that will happen while Saturn moves through Aquarius. And so just naturally, when Saturn goes retrograde in Aquarius, can you see how that can help us throw off the past? How it can help us move forward? Retrograde, rebel, review, to look at things differently. Saturn retrograde in Aquarius could also be a natural time period to really pay attention to future-orientated messaging. Because when it's retrograde in Aquarius, it points towards Leo, the Leo polarity. And of course, we're dealing with passive fixed fire here. And so that spark of life force that leads us to creativity, to be and do, to exist. And it leads us to recognizing that each and every soul has a unique creative spark within us to contribute to the evolution of humanity. And so when Saturn's retrograde in Aquarius, it's to break free from the traumas of the past, the resistance to change, as I was saying, and find that courage to just live life, to do. Because Aquarius is fixed air, Leo is fixed fire. And those fixed modality signs can have a tendency to let everything just stay in their head, air. We think about it, we ponder it, but fixed energy, we don't initiate, we don't do anything. And so it builds up pressure until a cataclysm forces us to change. So whenever Saturn's retrograde in Aquarius, it is a time period to change. It's going to be a little different than a Mercury retrograde cycle. What do I throw off? What do I throw off? What do I initiate? What do I initiate? Another archetype with the Leo polarity is self-love, an emotional maturation that leads to self-responsibility. If we don't work on emotional self-reliance in Cancer, I rely on myself to meet my emotional needs, then that emotional immaturity follows through into Leo. And then we have all of the things that can happen from this. Emotional immaturity and insecurity will project that past forward instead of breaking free from it. So we can have wounds of childhood re-experience. We can be that bottomless pit and our need for love. No matter how much love our parent or partner gives us, it's not enough. We can fall into love affairs so that we can feel like we are the center of someone's universe. And we are meant to love ourselves more deeply here. And of course, it can lead into the distortions of narcissism or that starving artist syndrome. No one sees my creativity. And in those situations, we can seek even more drama and attention through words, activities, etc. And so sometimes evolution may require the drama and trauma events to force us inward to self-reflect, Saturn retrograde again, and to self-love, the Leo polarity. We will also find that individuals, Leo, me, we're going to gravitate to others that are like-minded, because together we can then find that courage to support creative ideas or social activism ideas together. If we can't quite do it alone, better together, we find those that will help give us the courage. That's not necessarily bad, only if you become too codependent in that way, rather than that ability to be your group of one and do it yourself when necessary. And so when we find ourselves looking for those like-minded souls, we can find during Saturn retrograde in Aquarius that we end up changing groups. One group just doesn't support us anymore, and I've got to move on. And so the past, the present, and the future are still going to get all involved here. And while Saturn retrograde in Aquarius is a fantastic time to break free and move forward, it's not guaranteed. We could get even more insecure and really dig in our heels, fixed polarity, and not make our changes. We can see here that the youth can be very motivated. This is something that I see happening as Saturn moves through Aquarius. The youth watching all these extremes of inequality in regards to wealth, and they do the same job and they don't get paid what, elders got paid when they did the job before them. That's going on where the youth is getting paid less and less and less with all of the technological changes mixing in there as well. And so we could see a lot of the youth motivated to really change society and authority structures during Saturn in Aquarius, Jupiter, and just wait till when Pluto goes through Aquarius. And they may be motivated because they have no other choice. It's survival or else. So how well can we recognize the larger picture, which is Aquarius, the collective situation Aquarius, and then understand our own unique creative role, Leo? And can we honor and recognize that in the other person? Again, everyone has a role in the play. Everyone has unique creative talents to bring to planet Earth. That can help us with creating more of this fairness and equality. Now, I will say, again, most evolution is slow, step by step, day by day, Darwinian, if you want to call it that. And it's interspersed with the cataclysmic evolutions. And that's where evolutionary forces overcome resisting forces. We're going to see quite a mix of that through Saturn in Aquarius. We're going to see more than our fair share of cataclysms. And it may really bring a lot of the various social issues to front and center stage, and masses, waking up and saying, forget this. We're the only country that doesn't have universal health care. Or forget this, banks making, what was all the banks, where did I hear this figure? I'm not going to have the exact amount, but I'm going to quote something very close. Somewhere I read or heard that all the banks in the United States last year, and if it's not 2019, it was 2018, made something like $20-30 billion in profit. That's off of you and I. Tell me that doesn't change. There are those who think that banking should be a public utility. I got a slide on that in here too. And so, can you see the spark of universal source in everyone? Can you see it everywhere? Can you unconditionally love? I'm connected to love regardless of any condition, and in unconditional love, I am free. Abraham Hicks. And I like this one. Unconditional love is like the sun. It shines forth whether you want it to or not. It gives whether you want to receive or not. Love doesn't care about age or race or religion. It doesn't care whether the other person loves you back or not. All it knows is that it feels right. Well, now that I've asked this question, I'm going to test you. I'm going to bring a chart out. Donald Trump. As I was looking at Uranus transiting through, or excuse me, Saturn transiting through Aquarius, I was like, oh, Saturn retrograde. I wonder if Saturn's retrograde is going to hit any of his Leo planets. And so in the inner chart is Donald Trump's natal. The outer chart is the transit of when the second Saturn retrograde cycle next year in 2021. The highlight of any retrograde cycle is conjunction or opposition to the sun. Here is the sun opposition to Saturn. And you can see how tight it will be. Minutes. The sun 10 Leo, 11 minutes. Pluto 10 Leo, 2 minutes natally for Donald Trump. And Saturn retrograde over there at 10 Aquarius, 11 minutes. Will he be president next year? I don't know. I've said in my 2020 forecast that it's going to take extreme activism because on election day, he's going to be having a nodal axis return. If you want to look right here, you see his north node 22, 21 Gemini, south node 21 Sag. You see by 2021 year, it's moved down to 9 degrees Gemini Sag. On election day, it's going to be right on his nodal axis return. Stay tuned. But what's really also going on in his chart that I have to point out for more reasons than one is transiting Neptune is really starting to hit this nodal axis right now, 2019 through 2022. And while Neptune is very subtle, Neptune is all consuming. When it dissolves something, it dissolves it. It'll be interesting to see whether or not the public support for Donald Trump wanes through this coronavirus situation. With Saturn dipping into Aquarius for 3 months and then going back into Capricorn before going into Aquarius again, I wondered out loud in our last full moon podcast a couple days ago if we might not see coronavirus ease up northern hemisphere, move down to southern hemisphere, and come back to northern hemisphere this fall. I don't know. Time will tell. But Neptune is really going to bring a lot of how would I want to say this? I'm going to say a cliche, no disrespect. It may bring Trump some come to Jesus moments. You know, he started poop on and everything's going to be okay with this coronavirus situation, and it is not anything he can control. It is not anything he can influence. It's going to do what it's going to do, and it may expose just how much Trump has gutted all of our health services. Stay tuned with these Neptune transits, regardless of whether he's reelected or not. If he's still alive on planet Earth next year in 2021, he's going to have this intense opposition to his natal Pluto. Will it bring any shock and traumas for him? Will there be, a health crisis of his own sixth house? Will there be any possible financial dealings from all of his many, many lawsuits that he has? We'll find out. So, one more time, here's the dates that Saturn's in Aquarius. I want to finish up looking at some of the outer aspects that Saturn will be making with every single outer planet through its passage in Aquarius. So here's those dates. And as I said, one more time, the interface between the past and the future through Saturn in Aquarius. Here's the ingress of Saturn into Aquarius, March 21st. What I wanted to point out is the planets are pretty closely congregated in the heavens right now. They go on March 21st, they'll be going from 23 degrees to 17. Venus just made a conjunction to Uranus, so they're even less than 120 degrees right now. And here's how much Venus is moving over, the next couple of weeks. When you have all the planets within 1/3 of the zodiac, that's called a locomotive pattern in traditional astrology. It's a concentration of energy, and it tends to have just a real strong focus in that narrow direction. I actually have a locomotive pattern in my chart from 7th to 11th house, most of it congregated in 9th and 10th. Any wonder that I teach. So the big question that we will ask is how much forward progress can be made with the Capricorn stellium. If you look at that ingress chart, chart, which can kind of set the tone through Saturn and Aquarius, you see that Mars just had a conjunction to Jupiter in Capricorn, and they're only 1 degree from Pluto. That's a pretty concentrated amount of energy. We have Venus right there in a trine to those 3. Will people just want to tune out, check out? Will Sun in Aries really help with the initiations of social activism with the nice sextile? I look at this and I go, shoo, boy, okay, we've got to get through 2020. We've got to get to Jupiter and Aquarius. Here are the 5 conjunctions that we have going on in 2020. We already had that one and only of Saturn to Pluto. You see where Jupiter will have 3, followed the end of the year with Jupiter conjunct 0.5 Aquarius. Let's look at Saturn and Pluto. Their cycle varies between 33 to 37 years. And so they've just initiated a new cycle for the next 3.5 decades. They won't have an aspect until the tail end of Saturn in Aquarius when it moves 30 degrees beyond Pluto. However, their phasal relationship, new phase, is still going to be active. Saturn is still working to bust out and break free from the Pluto and Cap control. What they are doing is initiating a new structure of consciousness within the depth of our soul for each and every one of us. We have all been initiating a new maturation process relative to whatever our current circumstances in life are right now. You can just take a moment to reflect on the last few months of your life if you want. What's not working? What are you having to change? How are you having to grow up and move forward in new ways? And a phrase that I have a tendency to say with clients fairly often is your soul doesn't give a damn what your chronological age is. The lesson comes when the lesson comes. So you can be 81 years old here on planet Earth and you're still going to begin a new maturation process with Saturn Pluto. You'll do it relative to your current circumstances. Maybe you have to give up your house and move into assisted living. Who knows what the circumstances are, but you get the point. We're all having to face reality, grow up, take charge of our life, move forward. And as Uranus moves into Aquarius, there's that energy and courage to just leap forward if you make the effort. And so, one more time, you want to pay attention to any future orientated messages and really act upon them. Now, Saturn's going to go retrograde and dip back into Capricorn for several months this year. So while it's new phase with Pluto, we can still see a lot of old collective realities and structures continuing to break down and continuing to resist the change that we need to make or they need to make. And nowhere are we seeing this play out more than in the United States chart. So here I use the Gemini rising for July 4th. And I put the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of January 12th, 2020 in the outer circle. What I want to point out, though, is that when Saturn dips back into Capricorn, here are the dates that transiting Saturn makes a conjunction to the natal US Pluto. So that dip back into Capricorn is going to represent many of the last gasps of authoritarian attempts to have the control. And so it's going to go back and forth and back and forth, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, progressing in one way, falling back again, progressing in another way, falling back again, slowly moving forward. But with Jupiter still in Capricorn in 2020 and Saturn dipping back in, I would say on the broadest levels, do not give up hope if things are not progressing as fast or as far as you would like them to see, or like as you would like them to be happening. It will come. And so I think we'll have this presidential election very, very intense with the elites on both the Democratic and Republican side attempting to maintain control. And it is possible that we'll see wealth inequality even more visible and protested. And the U.S. is just going to continue these last few degrees of Pluto to natal Pluto, 23 to 27. It's going to continue to see a lot of its standing in the world crumbling. We're not handling the coronavirus anywhere near to the responsibility in which China has. Even though they don't treat their citizens very good, they have been able to just get right in there and take charge in helping minimize the effects of it. Stay tuned. Not only do we have transiting Saturn conjunct that US Pluto, transiting Jupiter in Capricorn is going to oppose the US Mercury in Cancer 3 times. So Saturn and Jupiter are quite active on this Mercury Pluto opposition. In some regards, it's going to give voices to the masses and progressive intents a little more than what we have seen in the past. As Saturn, continues into Aquarius and really starts busting out the energy of 12 years of Pluto and Cap compression and control, it's going to start pulling Pluto forward in those late degrees of Capricorn. And we've already talked about these subjects, whether it's wealth redistribution as the masses organize, whether it's health pandemics bringing leadership together, innovative technologies addressing climate change, all kinds of areas are going to start seeing progressive movement forward even before Pluto leaves Capricorn. He brought up 2 examples for you. The U.S. coal industry continues to lose jobs. Everything that Donald Trump and Republicans have tried to do to support the coal industry in the last 3 years, they've still lost almost 1,000 jobs. And in the U.S., in the last 12 months, there have been 2 months where renewable energy has generated more electricity than coal. Ooh, hallelujah. Haven't heard that in the news, have you? Here's another tidbit for you. A lot of the Republican-controlled governors and legislative houses have been really trying to purge voter rolls. They see the writing on the wall with the changing ethnicities of the United States, the browning of America, as they call it. So they're trying to just purge voters and voter suppression, making it harder and harder to vote. Well, it has been reported this week that new voters are registering to vote in Georgia faster then the GOP can purge them off the voter rolls. That right there is a little tidbit to tell you that there is some massive movements taking place, even when they're not always on the front page news headlines. I thought I'd point this out to you too while we're talking about Saturn, new phase, Pluto. I pulled up the chart for Saturn turning stationary direct, its second retrograde cycle in 21, turns direct October 10th, 21. Saturn turns direct at 6 degrees Aquarius, 52 minutes. The south node of the July 4th chart, whether you use the Sibley Sag rising or the Gemini rising, the south node is 6 degrees 35 minutes. It doesn't come back over it 3 times, but when Saturn stands still in the sky for 5 days, turning stationary direct, it will be having an impact on the masses. The moon of a country is the public opinions. It is the mood of the public emotionally as a group. And the US, July 4th, has moon in Aquarius. It's 18 degrees on your chart. And that south node of the moon is 6.5 degrees Aquarius. This is the innovation that the United States has always been known for with that south node in Aquarius. The creativity with that north node in Leo. Saturn's going to be very, very active with that through these 3 years in Aquarius. Saturn will go stationary direct October 22nd of 22 at 1835 Aquarius, just past the public's moon. So you can look at the 21 and 22 Saturn stationary direct finishing up its retrograde cycles as just being time periods there will be some type of momentum to just boom, really move through. And so Saturn's going to be doing that impact as it's moving new phase from Pluto in the sky, new phase from the natal Pluto. And that's going to be happening to the backdrop of these Pluto and Neptune transits you see on your screen. In 2021, both years, Pluto is making, by transit in the sky, 5 oppositions to Mercury. Here, I'll get my highlighter for you. Transiting Pluto here, 5 oppositions to the natal Mercury. The US was born with Mercury opposite Pluto, with both Mercury retrograde and Pluto retrograde. That is that polarity of opinion between liberal and conservative, inclusive versus exclusive, that takes place in our country. So 5 of these Pluto-Mercury oppositions is really, really going to be bringing the whole public conversation in this country front and center stage. What kind of a country are we? Do we take care of the masses? Do we take care of the poor? Do we take care of the sick when we have a health crisis? Then we'll have the Pluto conjunctions to natal Pluto for the first time in 2022 in the history of the United States. We are already within the orb of influence of a deep, deep soul return and people talking about it. We'll see what kind of actions forward Saturn and then Jupiter will bring with time. And I sense that this is going to be happening regardless of who is president for the next 4 years. What I also want to point out, though, is transiting Neptune up here, moving into the third decan, the last 10 degrees of Pisces. It is going to make last quarter squares to Mars at 21 Gemini 5 times in 2020, 21, followed by Neptune opposing itself, natal Neptune in its opposite sign Virgo, the religious fanaticism that we see in our country. 3 oppositions in 21. The late astrologer Robert Gover, who wrote the book Time and Money, would he studied U.S. Depressions, recessions, stock market downturns, etc. And he felt that whenever an outer planet made a harsh aspect to Mars, Neptune square, we would see financial downturns, stock market upsets. Anybody pay attention to the news today? The stock market dropped 7-8% of its value on top of what it already released over the last couple of weeks due to the coronavirus scare and Russia and Saudi Arabia refusing to cut oil production. So they're just both flooding the markets with oil and which will deflate prices. Anyway, it shook things up. I don't think we've seen the end of it. And whenever we do have these financial upsets and corrections in various ways, it brings about opportunities for the masses to rise up and move things forward. It brings about opportunities for changing cycles. I am an advocate of the public banking. I have more slides that I'll show you on that. But here I am pointing out some of this timing of these aspects of Pluto and Neptune in the sky to the natal US chart while Saturn is transiting in Aquarius. Stay tuned. And it's not all bad news either. Sometimes we need those upsets. Saturn is in a waning cycle to Neptune. Saturn is waning all of the other outer planets except for finally moving over Pluto. Saturn is going to make 1 waning semi-square to Neptune, then 3 waning semi-sextiles, and finally a conjunction in 26 at early Aries. And so as Saturn goes through last quarter and then into balsamic phase with Neptune, it will continue to break down conditioned belief systems and organized religions. Neptune is doing that all on its own, moving through Pisces and finishing up a 165-year cycle through the zodiac. It can scare the consensus world. It can have them really clinging to old religious patterning. At the same time, Saturn in Aquarius is breaking things up and moving us forward into quantum physics, more metaphysics, natural spiritual principles. Neptune in Pisces can be bringing back shamanism and old healing ways. And so it's very important that we reach for deeper spiritual understandings. Anytime we feel the Capricorn depressions, and this is reiterated because of Jupiter's year-long transit through Capricorn in 2020. We will have these breakthroughs with evolution of religion and spirituality. It may just not happen as fast as we want it to. We can also have environmental depressions going on between these two planets when reality does not support dreams or ideals, balsamic phase, what is breaking down, what is falling apart, what is not working. It can have us turning to drugs and wanting to just check out, or you can be doing it through, binge watching of TV, or, just, putting your head in the sand, wanting to ignore what's happening on planet Earth. It's possible it could see some destruction of social progress and safety nets, especially if masses do not want to be involved. It will specifically bring about more trauma, Aquarius, with destruction of the environment and species extinction via climate change. Eventually, as we get closer and closer to Saturn conjuncting Neptune, the masses are going to recognize the need to change their relationship with the material world. Can we have globalization support, a globalization of support around health crises? Coronavirus is going to come and it's going to go. Oh, by the way, the Spanish flu was a coronavirus, if you didn't know that. It took out something like 20 some million people, but we didn't really recognize a lot about how viruses were spreading with germs, etc. It was just starting. Will we start to recognize that we've got to be a part of renewable energy, Neptune in Pisces? Can we bring in the Saturn and Aquarius innovations? Can we have a mobilization to rebuild these social support systems that just seem to be falling through the cracks? Now, if there's one thing you can start to recognize through Neptune transiting Pisces, in evolutionary astrology, that last archetype, Neptune rules Pisces in 12th house. It is nature in all its rawness and all its naturalness. Well, here's something you're going to start to see in the news more and more through Saturn in Aquarius, and it can probably even expand even more when Jupiter moves into Aquarius. Remember, Aquarius is an air sign, and so it literally has rulership over the wind and destructive wind events. We can see the infrastructure breakdowns coming from increasingly strong wind events, like the tornadoes that just went through Tennessee, or the hurricanes and the cyclones. Well, there is a meteorological term called atmospheric rivers, and they are narrow ribbons of concentrated moisture that exists 1,000 to 2,000 feet above the land surface. And they typically have around 80-mile-per-hour winds. There's probably a variance there. And so what we have here is air currents, atmospheric rivers, where the air is saturated with up to 100% water vapor. These atmospheric rivers originate in all of the oceans worldwide, and they can flow thousands of miles before they will drop rain and snow on the land. And so climate change scientists are recognizing that they are increasing. Their moisture levels are increasing, and therefore they are becoming supercharged with the effects they have on the planet. They're getting wetter, longer, wider, and they'll dump 6 feet of snow on a mountain range in one day, or 12 inches of rain in a saturated area of the country in, a couple days or hours. This is going to increase as these planets move into Aquarius. The question becomes, how strong will they get? Are we going to start having superstorms that dump? And so these natural cycles of nature are becoming increasingly mitigated from our human-made effects. Just one example for you. So Saturn is going to have last quarter squares to Uranus. It's going to be a while before it has a conjunction. Saturn, Neptune, I think, are 33-year cycles. Saturn, Uranus are about 45, 48-year cycles. I think there's a little variance there. And so we're moving into last quarter phase of Saturn to Uranus. And, Uranus rules Aquarius. And so I see these two, and it's just, they're a planetary pair in EA, and they're not always bosom buddies. They're antithetical. Individuated consciousness wants control, and the individuated unconsciousness blows it up. And so you can even, as we've been saying many times here, you can break it down into defend the past or move into the future. You can look at it as the elders trying to maintain that past, or the youth trying to move us forward. Together, it raises that question of how gracefully can we evolve. I gotta sneeze, leRoy. I'm back. Sorry, felt that one come on. And so while Saturn in Aquarius can be innovative, Uranus in Taurus, I'm starting to describe it as one long crisis with survival and resources on planet Earth. And these two together could bring up literally survival crises that force us to consider new choices with food, clothing, and shelter. We don't know how much those sea levels are going to rise, but I put the statistic in another PowerPoint slideshow on another climate change subject. I'm going to pull this out of my head. I want to say 20%, 26% of the US lives on the coast, and 40% of citizens worldwide live in coastal areas. And if we see 6 feet, rising water levels, these two are going to have to come up with innovations, but the fear, the insecurity is, wars, water wars around territories, not letting people come to another country when theirs is underwater. All kinds of things can be stirred up with these two. The last quarter square, that crises in consciousness, it asks us to take a larger look at it. But when it comes down to fear, food flies off the shelves. Look at how that went on in the last couple of weeks in the United States in the news because of the coronavirus fears. And so Uranus in Taurus brings up a lot to do with literally food, clothing, and shelter. Thing we can look at with Saturn in Aquarius is that good old phrase, necessity is the mother of all invention. How will we bring through new innovative things? Oops, hold on a second. I'll get my slides. just briefly, in regards to Uranus and Taurus and food, climate change and technology to this point are creating mutated foods, pests, diseases that can have all kinds of unintended consequences for us. Stay tuned. We also have all these Pluto and Capricorn, the corporations through Pluto and Capricorn over the last dozen years, trying to control more and more and more aspects of the food chain, patenting seeds. Farmers can't just harvest their own seeds anymore. They have to buy it from the corporations who get to overcharge them. So we're having a monopolization of control of food, and it's going to create a future in which we're overweight yet undernourished. So Saturn in Aquarius will start to interact with this and might bring through new technologies. Example in the food area is the kurzna, making it into a perennial grain that you don't plow up every year. You leave in the ground and it comes back again, again, again. It replenishes the soil and it can replace wheat. Hydroponics is getting more and more innovative. Being able to grow more and more of our foods locally, especially when we undergo the kind of health crises that we see happening. So we may see new technology start to come through that localizes food production again. It's already been happening, but it may have increased. And then here's another area, the whole area of genetics and genomic medicine, and especially it outpacing ethics. So one more time, here's this human robot interface just going gun ho. We're learning to manipulate genetic traits before souls are even born. Augmented reality, being able to see through the body via various machines. We are already watching, 3D printing come through, not only with drugs or making a gun, but, making body parts and cells. And we're going to see more and more of that quantum physics bring in energy machines that can evaluate without invasion. That's what my energetic balancing work is all about. We just do it via a photograph and nothing is invasive. And of course, e-skins. These are biometric chips or tattoos that we get that measure the body, measure things in the body, like you got type 1 diabetes or type 2, can measure things going on with you 24/7, real time. And so Uranus is going to bring technological movement forward regardless of the sign. In Taurus, it's going to deal with food and it's going to deal with survival. And medicine starts to come into that survival area. The question will, become stronger and stronger with Saturn in Aquarius is, will it be accessible for everyone equally or just for those who have the money? Stay tuned. We're almost done. Saturn waning, Chiron. Gonna go from waning sextiles to semi-square to conjunction into this decade. And basically, when you get into that last quarter of the circle, while it's resolving karma and bringing things to conclusions, it's also known to get more and more and more intuitive, especially when you get to balsamic phase, which is returning to source, which is listening to source. And so I looked at this with Saturn in Aquarius to Chiron in Aries and thought there can be all kinds of sparks flying around the future messaging. Like, how do we heal the planet through these climate change effects? How do like-minded groups recognize their power in numbers to support social change, social support structures? How may the younger generations challenge their elders around all kinds of issues? Could we even, Chiron in Aries, start thinking about this whole concept of worldwide healthcare rights? We will get there as we get more populated and the world gets smaller and smaller. It's going to become eventually more efficient to keep all of us healthy and safer. Finally, we're going to have Jupiter make its conjunction to Saturn, end of this year, winter solstice, 0.5 Aquarius, and then it's going to move 45 degrees in front of Saturn before Saturn leaves Aquarius. Here we have a rebirthing of a 20-year cycle of societal evolution. Jupiter's expansion, Saturn's contraction. They govern, they're the social planets. They govern societal rules and laws and norms and, how we function together as groups of people. Well, what is interesting is they are ending a 200-year cycle of 20-year conjunctions in the earth element, and they are starting a 200-year cycle of 20-year conjunctions in the air element. And if you just look at that broadly, and you look at the last 200 years, and you look at what we have physically done on the planet in regards to, technology and expanding and, living and just moving. I mean, there's been so much that we have done physically. We don't have to live in fear of starving in the Northern Hemisphere in the winter anymore. We've got all these physical things to keep us comfortable. As these two planets move into the air element, the shift is going to go to the mental world. The shift is going to go into services. It's, you don't need more than one smartphone. You don't need more than, so many pairs of shoes, whatever it is. For most of us, we don't need more than one vehicle. And so a lot of the population on the planet has been achieving these physical things, and there's going to be this movement into satisfaction on a soul level again. The mental, the services, which will be the things like massage, or even, things like traveling when we're not all scared of a virus. You get the point of what I'm saying here. However, in context of this cycle, as Jupiter moves forward, societies and groups of people are realizing they've got to evolve and create new social support systems. And there's a variety of ways in which we can do this. And here are the dates that Jupiter goes into Aquarius, and it dips into Pisces, goes back to Aquarius. It has a tendency to be in a sign for about a year. When the retrograde cycle gets involved, Jupiter's retrograde once a year for 4 months, and it stands still, I think, 4 days. It really breaks it up. So we're going to have half a year Aquarius, half a year Pisces, and half a year Aquarius before we have half a year Pisces again. However, it will be in Aquarius in 2021, and it won't go back to Capricorn. This is when I see a lot of the Aquarian rebellions and movements forwards really start to take off. We're going to get a taste of it with Saturn for 3 months. And when Saturn goes back and forth, I like to teach this webinar when it first goes into the sign. So we're watching and we're aware. And this is why, again, I say don't get too disappointed if it doesn't change as fast as you want this year. But by all means, put all your effort in. And then 2021 is going to take off even more. And new groups will come forth. Established groups will reorganize. Some issues will leap forward. Some will remain suppressed or stuck. And again, as Jupiter joins Saturn in Aquarius, equality will manifest to the degree that the masses rise up and demand it. So here's a recap. I probably just already said this. Saturn initiates it this year, but Jupiter's still in Capricorn. It takes off stronger in 21, and it will take off stronger in 22, 23, 24. Pluto goes into Aquarius. Do whatever you can throughout this year. Do not give up. Keep your eyes looking forward and pointed towards the future. So here is, as these two, Jupiter then and Saturn, move into Aquarius, I think that we will revisit this universal basic income. I mean, they're already talking worldwide. What can we do when we've got to quarantine people at home and they can't work? If they close down a school and there's no one to take care of the children? If a whole family gets quarantined, what are we going to do? So we not only have the artificial intelligence, robot technology, automation making jobs obsolete, we are going to have a new means of supporting the public. And so universal basic income trials have been taking place all over in different areas. The Democratic candidate Andrew Yang is an advocate of this. And the public banking movement actually proves how you can support a universal basic income for the public. Today, approximately half of the costs of any infrastructure, you build a new civic center in your community, you build a new bridge because the old one is breaking down. Any of those public infrastructure costs that are done over long periods of times with bonds, almost half the cost is interest in private coffers. There's an Ellen Brown article, the creator of the Public Banking Institute, on how you can do that. Here is the wealth tax proposals that Liz Warren and Bernie Sanders were talking about. 2% tax on wealth over $50 million. And what we're looking at is 2 cents on a dollar if you have over 50 million. We'll create 2.75 trillion over 10 years. You can see on your screen what it will pay for. This stuff, they tell us we can't pay for universal health care. We already pay twice as much as other countries. That doesn't fly. All you've got to do is look at facts. So what can you do? Support the publicbankinginstitute.org. If you live in the United States, North America, you can see where they are active with this movement. If this economic downturn comes about in 21, 22, you will see public banking take off like you did cannabis. You can put your cash and assets in credit unions and community banks. How many of you are aware that the new president of Mexico, AMLO, that's his initials for his name, okay? He has begun constructions on 2,700 branches of a government-owned bank, a public bank. They call it, I don't know the Spanish word, but they call it the bank of the poor. So this movement is taking off, and Ellen Brown just completed published her new book, Banking on the People. I would recommend you get that. You can go to her website and follow her blog if you really, really want to be socially active with Saturn followed by Jupiter in Aquarius over the next few years. Finally, where am I stuck in my life? How do I address any issues from the past? How do I detach and objectify what happened? How do I unconditionally love myself? Where am I being shown movement forward? How do I rebirth creativity in myself? How do I choose to participate in the world? Here's the dates of all of the Saturn conjunction, the outer planets. As you can see, we're going to go through a dozen years here where Saturn conjuncts all the outer planets and Jupiter. So you can see as we looked at Saturn waning these outer planets, how the outer world, Saturn, can be crumbling regardless of the signs, and how Aquarius can bring us innovative understandings and perspectives about how we can move ourselves forward together on planet Earth. If you didn't get my 2020 forecast, I'm still recommending it. I did say it would come down to Bernie and Joe Biden in January. Well, that's exactly what it did. I'm a Bernie Sanders candidate, but I suspect Joe Biden is probably going to be the candidate. But I'm broadly in the any functioning adult camp, so I will support a Democratic candidate no matter who. I talk about a lot of other things in here and what a wild year 2020 is going to be. The nodal axis is going to shift into Gemini Sag, class on that early May, and Venus retrograde in Gemini early May. However, Wednesday, one more time, we will go through Saturn in Aquarius through the 12 houses. All right. Thank you very much. This is it. Questions, comments? Did I go? Yeah, I went a little over.
Nope, did wonderful. Nothing on the board, Kim, so I think you're clear.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And we will see you in 2 nights if it's your choice to listen live.